Okay, I call this work session to order to discuss the budget and compensation. And Dr. Garza, would you lead off, please?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Strauss. Tonight, we have just a brief presentation for you in response to previous conversations that we've had at numerous work sessions. I don't know how many to date work sessions we've had on compensation over this last school year, but it's been quite a number. Tonight's work session, our team is prepared to give you a very brief update on numbers with regard to the actual numbers, budget, and the amount of revenue that we believe will be short moving forward. And then we have our team has developed a model based upon your feedback and your consensus and recommendations around how the $40 million of additional revenue into the teacher salary schedule could be utilized to meet the needs of our school community and staff. Now, the presentation that our team will give on the compensation modeling of the $40 million, I will indicate that I believe the team did a great job, and the board was very clear that you did not want that money to be an across the board necessarily, but to emphasize and target the money in the areas where we're farthest from the area average for our marketplace. And so where you remember in the line, we have a SAG in the middle in years 5 through 20. And so our team has done, I think, a really good job of targeting more money to kind of narrow that gap in those strategic areas, but also changing the slope of the line. Now, moving forward, should we not have the full $40 million? I'm hoping we do. But if we don't have the full $40 million, I think the same methodology could still be utilized, and we would just adjust it based upon the amount of revenue we have. So main thing we ask for you tonight is to give us feedback about, was this exact what you intended, and is this methodology taking us down the right direction with regard to your desires to change our compensation structure. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen and let her walk through the updates and then into our compensation modeling, and the full team is here to answer questions should you have any.
Thank you. And
Okay,
for board
Kristen.
members, the document that we'll be going through is on board docs. It's been refreshed, so it should be quite up to date. Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Michael, Ms. Quinn, Dr. Ramey, whoever is going to do this. Thank you.
Sure, we're actually going to share in the presentation. Ms. Michael will kind of provide the budget update, and then Dr. Ramey will kind of provide the modeling for the teacher compensation.
Good evening. So just as a reminder, in the FY17 advertised budget, FCPS requested an increase in the county transfer of $122.7 million. But included in the county's advertised budget was a transfer increase of 3%, which provides an increase in operating funding of $54.8 million. So in the first highlighted light blue line, it shows that left a gap of $67.9 million between our request and what was included in the county's advertised budget. So as I presented at the March 14th work session, with increased state funding for both state aid and sales tax, totaling $16.8 million, this reduced that projected gap to $51.1 million. Budget staff have received spring enrollment projections, thank you very much, facilities, for next school year, and we're finalizing the calculation of staffing for all schools. So preliminarily, based on those spring projections, they reflect a decrease of 369 students as compared to the fall projections, which we used to calculate the advertised budget. And based on that change, we project additional savings of approximately $3 million. So as a reminder, the cost of enrollment growth and demographic changes is the end result of applying each of the individual staffing formulas to the number of students and the student demographics projected at each individual school. Staffing is calculated for each school, both at the proposed and approved stages of the budget process, and the cost of growth is determined by calculating the difference between the current budget's allocated staffing and the staffing generated when the formulas are recalculated using the new enrollment and demographic projections for the next school year's budget. The final adjustment on this slide is the impact of the state life insurance rate changes for FY17. Those will require increased expenditures of $1.2 million. So when this increase for life insurance is combined with a projected $3 million decrease related from enrollment and student demographics, it results in a net decrease in expenditures of $1.8 million. So when that is combined with the previous shortfall between our request in the county transfer and the county's advertised budget, that reduces our projected shortfall to $49.3 million.
Okay, thank you. And obviously, this is a public document. This information will be also updated and shared with the Board of Supervisors. Are there any questions on this update? Yes, Mr. Moon.
Just a quick question on the state life insurance rate. I think this is one of those items that we don't often see when we discuss the budget. Could you give us a little explanation of what this is?
Absolutely, I can. When the conference report was presented, they had a correction to the state life insurance rate. So it was incorrectly projected in the governor's proposed budget. So with that increase in the rate, which is going to 1.31%, that means our expenditures will increase by $1.2 million. So periodically, the state life insurance rates are updated, but this is a correction to the previous rate.
I guess I'm even asking for even more basic question of what this is.
Sorry as I go into the technical details. So we're required to participate both in the Virginia retirement system, but our employees are also required to participate in the state life insurance program. So because we're required to participate, the state sets that rate. So this is a state rate for all of our employees.
Okay, thank you. That was for the public.
Ms. McLaughlin.
I was just wondering, from having talked to some of the supervisors and the numbers they give us, as you know, they keep showing that they're, right now, it was going to be like 70 million, not the 54.8. And I get that's because they're talking about the 13 million for the capital. And then there was also, I think, about a 2.8 for the structural imbalance.
It's for our debt service.
Debt service, okay.
Correct. There's debt service each year. This year is the first time they're adding that 13.1 funding from the Infrastructure Finance Committee. So that's new. But typically each year we have the transfer both for operating and then our debt service, which goes to our construction fund.
So thank you. That's what I thought would be very important to bring clarity, because for the community, when they're looking at it and saying, well, wait a minute, you're already looking at 70 million, but technically for our general fund, which is what we've relied on every year when we consider our transfer and our operating costs, it is the 54, because the other two amounts are going into a different fund, and that isn't going to address the increased costs of operations over last year. So I did want to just make sure, since they give us different looking numbers.
Great point.
Okay, any other questions on this section? If not, we'll go on to the next. Oops, oh, nope, sorry, Mr. Williams.
That's okay. Just a couple of quick questions. So in the demographic adjustment there, what is the population that you referenced, an increase of 369, but do you have that number of what the population would be, is, or whatever we're using?
The number for our total overall projected enrollment for FY17 will be 186,842 students.
Is that the same number that I've seen in the past? That seems familiar.
No, so what we were showing in the past is our proposed budget had a projected total enrollment of 187,211 students. So the change between the proposed and this approved number is that decrease of 369 students.
So just to clarify, is this an actual count, or is this when you say is it a projected? Can you explain what that means?
Yes, in both of these cases, these are projections. So in the proposed budget, it's the projection completed in the fall for the following school year, and then the number for the approved budget is the projections that were just completed by facilities, again, for next school year that starts in the fall. So they're both projections.
Okay, so that's the figure we're expecting for September.
That is correct.
Okay. And up above, the 16.8 8 million additional state aid and sales tax. Is that the same amount that the Board of Supervisors is using, or is there a difference?
Correct. You've probably heard some of the Board of Supervisors using a higher number, approximately 20 million. And from our March 14th work session, the difference between the number we're using and the number that the county has been using is that sales tax projection. The state had projected an increase in sales tax for FCPS of 4.1%, and we are recommending that we adopt an increase of 4%, which is 3.8 million lower than the state's projection. Now, the state reminded us on their calculation sheet, again, when they sent the numbers, that sales tax is a projection, but will be paid based on actual receipts. So when we look at historical trends, and when we look at the county who's forecasting an increase in sales tax of 2.5%, we really feel that our projection of 4% is an accurate projection. And the state is using a much more aggressive projection, and it doesn't match our current trends or what the county's projecting.
And I think at the last time you presented, you were in conversation with the county in terms of their number. Have they come to agreement with us in terms of how that number should be estimated?
Sure. So prior to our last work session, I had worked with county budget staff in terms of sharing our projection with them. They had seen the chart that we had prepared for the work session, and they also shared that chart with the board. But their board is still using the full projection from the state. But we did work with the county to ensure that we're both projecting sales tax using similar methodologies and approach.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Hines, and then I'll go back for Mr. And Ms. Evans.
Yeah, I guess I'm following up on that because my question was also about the 16.8 million that we project in additional state aid and why that's different from what people in the community may be hearing the Board of Supervisors think we're getting from the state. And that has to do partly with, we believe that the state is over-projecting our population growth. Okay, and so that's part of it, but also that they are being too aggressive in their assumptions about state sales tax, which is what you just talked about. And I just wanted to clarify again, we're using a 4% projected growth in state sales tax, and the county, when they do their budget, they use a what percent?
Their advertised budget includes a 2.5% increase in sales tax projected for FY17.
Okay, so actually we're using a projected state sales tax revenue percent that is considerably higher than what the county uses.
That is correct.
Why do you think it's true that they are so much more conservative than we are? Do we have any idea?
I think in both of our cases, right, we're very sensitive to not over-projecting revenue, because when you come in below revenue, right, you run a great risk of then needing to ensure that you can make a reduction to expenditures so you don't overspend your budget. So it is best practice to always conservatively project your revenue, which is try to project it lower, make sure your revenue comes in at or above your projection, and the same methodology in terms of projecting expenditures conservatively so you don't overexpend what you've budgeted for.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I think it is smart to be very careful about that. It's just interesting to me that the county uses such a low projected percent, which must mean that their actual ends up being significantly higher than they're projected, and they will realize that at some point in their own budget, right?
That's correct. And they did just release a budget question response today, which does look at both their projections and their trends for sales tax. So it was in the packet of responses that went to their board today.
Oh, and so is that a response to the question that we asked then about, because I
believe this question also came from their board, so I believe the one I was looking at right before I came over here was asked by their board, but I know we asked them a similar question as well.
Okay, thank you. Just one last question. Would you mind, if we don't get that response, could you forward that information to us?
Sure, I would be happy to.
Thank you.
And one interesting clarification for some of our new board members with sales tax. Sales tax comes in and is used in the year in which it is collected. So this is why there is uncertainty as to what sales tax will come in, whereas on the real estate tax, obviously that is a known amount of money that the Board of Supervisors, once they've set the tax rate and all of that, that is a known and guaranteed amount. The sales tax is not, and that's why there is always caution with that.
Correct. And we did include a projected increase in our sales tax in our advertised budget. We had already projected an increase. So when we recognized this 16.8 million increase, we further increased from our prior projection.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Evans, then Mr. Moon.
Yes, thank you. When we had a work session on the compensation study on March 14th, we had a lot of follow-up questions that we had asked. Where do we stand on those?
So we're working really hard to address all of the budget questions. We've also really been focused on getting staffing calculated so schools can start meeting with HR in terms of hiring. But we really are focusing on those, and I do expect that you'll see a substantial number of budget question responses posted early next week.
Okay. I mean, one of the concerns I have is that a couple of the questions had to do with, decision-making, and so it would be good to have that before we make any decisions.
Mr. Moon?
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. I'm sure the Board of Supervisors is looking for every possible source of additional revenue. With that in mind, if they were to use 4.0% for sales tax, the discrepancy between 4% and 2.5, which is 1.5%, could you translate that into dollar figure?
While she's looking that up, in response to Ms. Evans' question, we do have our regular, every month update on the fiscal year 17 budget at our April the 18th all-day work session, and we have significant amount of time to work on that, as well as compensation, which is a commensurate question. This one was added, this work session was added tonight, specifically because you had asked to see the model, what the model could look like for the 40 million. So that's why we added this work session tonight, specifically to talk about the model for that. So we'll have more ready at the next work session.
That's good to know. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but we were kind of torn between B and C on the modeling, but you're making a recommendation based on, is it C that you're primarily using as the model for what you're recommending tonight?
So I'm glad you asked that question, Ms. Evans. I may need to go back and clarify.
All right.
We all had kind of a lengthy discussion around what's currently included in the fiscal year 17 budget.
Right.
One of the questions we ask you all is, assuming for a moment that all the compensation components of the budget are funded, because there's assumptions in that, but assuming they are, we recommended to you all that base increase for employees be on the step and the 1% market scale adjustment be distributed to employees based upon our current scales, because it's something they know. And if we move it while we're trying to develop it, we felt like it would cause a lot of confusion for our employees. So you all, based on that discussion, agreed that would be the case, assuming everything is funded as it is. Okay? So for the base and the 1% market scale adjustment, assuming funded, would be on our current scales, and then we'll keep working on changes to our scales, but they would not go into effect until fiscal year 18 and beyond. Okay? The only differentiation you made was the 40 million. And you had indicated to us that assuming the 40 million additional revenue into the teacher schedule could be funded, that we would make adjustments to the teacher scale based upon that amount of money. Did that clarify? So when you ask about the BC model,
BC, so
all of that, you did make it clear that you want some, and when we're thinking about the design of the scales for fiscal year 18 and beyond, you told us that you wanted some variation of the BC slope.
Right.
And so we'll be talking about that at future board meetings about that design.
Oh, all right. And I guess
Did I answer your question?
I think actually
Okay.
that did. That clarified a great deal. And so in this line, the line that we're seeing in a minute, does that include the 1% or no?
I don't believe it does, because we were just modeling what the 40.
Just the 40.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
But the 1%, assuming that would be funded, it would move the whole scale up, but it moves it up. That will be across the board.
Okay. There are no other questions on this, then let's go on to the background on the teacher scales.
Did you all have an answer to that
Oh,
question?
yes.
I
So
apologize, Ms.
the
Strauss.
additional 1.5%, if the county were to increase their projection by 1.5%, would generate an additional 2.6 million in revenue.
2.6, thank you.
0.6 million. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, background in the teacher scales.
Good evening. By way of background in our timeline, in December, the first phase of the compensation study, which included a market analysis of teacher salaries, was completed. This analysis determined FCPS's market position in regard to our teacher pay scales and was shared with the board at the December work session. And then as Dr. Garza just discussed, we came back in March and talked both about long-term and future changes to our scale and then also this initial investment. And tonight, we want to focus on that initial investment, that $40 million piece. When we consider the division's position as related to surrounding school systems, we see that although FCPS has more teachers than any other school district, collectively, there are considerably more teaching positions throughout the surrounding school system than in FCPS. Nearly 26,000 of these teaching positions offer higher potential career earnings for teachers. This reflects a need to look at FCPS's position as compared to the local market as a whole, rather than comparing us against one other system. To begin addressing the market competitiveness of our teacher pay scale, we've looked at an immediate investment of $40 million. In March, the board provided guidance that there should be a targeted approach focused on closing the gap where the disparity between our current steps and the market is at its greatest. In utilizing a methodology that targeted our largest gaps, we developed 4 levels of investment for the $40 million. Level 1 represents gaps that are greater than 11% from the market average, and these gaps will be closed by 50%. In level 2, the gaps are greater than 6% and up to 11%. We'll close these gaps by 37.5%. In level 3, the gaps are between 3 and 6% from the market average. These gaps will be closed by 25%. And level 4 represents gaps that are less than 3% from the market average. There will be no change here. In effect, we'll be making the most impact in areas where we are currently furthest below the market average. To illustrate this change, we can look at the effect this initial investment would have on employees at 3 different steps in the master's lane of our pay scale. If we look at an employee on step 5, the difference between current FCPS salary and the market average is 5.4% or $3,055. This would fall into level 3, gaps which are between 3 and 6%. So the gap for this employee would be closed by 25%. The step remains below market, but the gap is reduced from $3,055 down to $2,291. On step 15, the difference between current FCPS salary and the market average is 12.2% or $8,924. This is a level 1 gap, gaps greater than 11%, so the gap would be closed by 50%. The step remains below market, but the disparity is reduced from $8,924 down to $4,462. And then looking at step 20, the difference between the current FCPS salary and the market average is 8.2% or $6,953. This would fall into level 2, gaps that are greater than 6% and up to 11%. The gap would be closed by 37.5%. The step remains below market at $80,280, but this is only $4,346 below market as compared to the $6,953 prior to closing the gap. These examples are based on the FY17 salaries, as we just mentioned, and do not include that 1%. The examples provide context for the impact on our employees, but we also want to show the impact the investment will have when we compare the proposed salary scale curve against our current salary curve and the market average. On the graph, the FCPS current salary scale is represented by the green line, the recommended salary scale by the orange line, and the market average is represented by the blue line. The graph reflects the initial $40 million investment, creating a recommended scale that begins to change the shape of our curve. While we're still below market, the sag that existed in the middle of our scale, where we were furthest from the market, is substantially reduced. If you look, we also see reductions as we head towards the ends of the scale, but these are not as prevalent because we were closer to market at the beginning and the end of our scale prior to the investment. Again, with the targeted approach, gaps that were greater than 11% from the market average were closed by 50%. Gaps that were greater than 6% and up to 11% closed by 37.5%, and gaps that were between 3 and 6% closed by 25%. And again, the gaps that are less than 3% from the market average saw no change. The salary scale curve depicts only the master's lane of the teacher salary scale. However, the initial investment impacts all lanes of the scale. This heat map showcases the recommended targeted approach across the entire salary schedule. The 6 lanes of the teacher salary schedule run across the top of the chart, with the individual steps 1 through 29 labeled along the left-hand side. This allows us to show the impact on each step within the salary schedule. The red areas represent steps where the gap is greater than 50% from the market average and closed by 50%. The pink areas represent steps where the gap is greater than 6 and up to 11% and will be closed by 37.5%. The yellow areas represent steps where the gap is between 3 and 6%. These gaps will be closed again by 25%. And the green areas represent steps where the gap is less than 3% from the market average and there will be no change. In addition to showing how the overall teacher salary schedule is impacted by the targeted investments, the map provides the number of employees impacted at each color level. Within the red area, the salary scale, we see that 3,995 teachers we have 3,995 teachers that will be impacted by the initial investment. These are steps where the gap to market will be closed by 50%. You also notice that over 3,000 of these teachers are in the master's lane within that red area. Nearly 5,000 or 32% of our teachers are on a step that is pink, where the gap to market will be closed by 37.5%. And approximately 3,400 teachers are on a step that will see an increase of 25%, which is represented in the yellow. This means that more than half of the division's teachers are on a step that would see a salary gap to market closed by at least 37.5% through this initial investment. And it highlights that the targeted approach allows for the gaps that are the greatest from market to receive the largest increases, and we reduce the distance of those steps from the market average in this next year. Go ahead. So, tomorrow is April 1, and we want to close by, as spring quickly passes us by, providing the budget calendar, which includes important dates as we move towards the beginning of FY17.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions on this part of it? Yes, Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
So this does not include on on slide 9, it does not indicate the 1% MSA. So when we do the 1% MSA, what does that do to this chart? And how does that affect your noodle chart as far as our gaps? Because if the assumption is, and maybe my assumption is wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, but if the assumption is this is in addition to the step plus 1%, what happens to the chart that way?
For the chart on slide 9, every position on this chart would receive that 1%, because that moves the scale for every employee in the system. Okay? What happens to chart 8 is it will move that curve slightly, but we have to remember that other jurisdictions will also be providing a COLA, a market scale adjustment, some type of adjustments to their scale, which will move that market average. So the 1% would just be keeping up with what's happening in our surrounding jurisdictions, because that's going to move that market average.
And whenever you want to see those combined, we could actually show you the two combined, but it gets messier, and so that's why we didn't show them together. Because the 40 million, not everyone, under this methodology, not all teachers would get it.
No, I understand
You
that.
see what I'm saying? So we can always show combined at some point when you're ready for us to do
Okay,
that.
I'd actually like two things. One is to see it combined, but I also would like to see it from a standpoint of percentage increases using the nomenclature that the Board of Supervisors is using on compensation, where they've said everybody gets X percent, and then our first responders get 5%. So some of what this indicates is that some of our staff will be getting a range of between 4 and 6% plus 1%. Is that correct?
So
0 plus 1% would be, but and then this group here would be getting between 4 and 9%?
So let me see if I could try to provide some clarity. So everyone will receive 1% from our basic market scale adjustment. The basic increase of the step will also provide an average of 2.3% across all employees. Okay, so that's how we get to the 3.3% average. That is a basic compensation increase that we provided to all employees.
And that's the same, that's equivalent to what the county is providing for county employees in their budget.
And then with the 40 million, the increase does range from, I'm trying to go through the chart, less than 1% up to 8%.
Less than 1% plus the 3.3. So you're actually saying a range of 4.3 to, what was the high end?
8.
So it's 4.3 to 11.3.
And then remember on that other chart, 3,000 of our teachers whose market average gap was less than 3% are receiving 0%. So we could do the average of the 40 million. I was just giving you a range. So really the range is 0 through 8%. I just said less than 1% for any incremental increase based on the 40 million, but we have to remember close to 3,000 of our employees whose gap is less than 3%, those salaries will not change. That was
Except for the
level
3.3.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right, Mr. Press?
Thank you very much. I had a very brief question, and I didn't have time to do the multiplication. But I wanted to ask, you know, we've divided this into levels, which I think is a very good way to do this, because I think it makes it easy for the public and our funders at the Board of Supervisors to understand where exactly these investments are going. And I think that's very powerful. I agree with the methodology. I think that you guys have done an awesome job in reducing that SAG, which in my opinion is one of the greatest threats to our teachers' retention in their middle of the career range. I did want to ask if we had a breakdown of how much the cost of each level's investment might be. For example, if we're to fully fund the level 1 request, where we're reducing those gaps greater than 11% by 50%, how much that would cost, and if we have breakdowns for the costs of each of those levels of investment.
Ms. Michaels looking up the data.
I also want to emphasize while they're looking that up, if you don't mind, because I like to fill the void, okay? So that I'm good for that purpose while they're looking that up. But when you talk about the percentages, I know people sometimes equate, wow, that's a big percentage. I think we have to be very clear about this is still catch-up, and this is only taking our teachers halfway to the market average. And I think we have to continually say that. There were many years where our teachers got nothing, either were frozen, or, I mean, we're trying, I don't have to tell this board, you struggled with those tough decisions even before me. They got a partial increase. And so what's happened is that lag, and we got behind the market very quickly. So when you look at the percentages, it may sound like a lot, but that's what is sometimes required to play catch-up. And again, it's only getting us halfway to the market average. Not to the top of the marketplace, not even to the market average. halfway to the market average. And I just think that context is really important for our public to understand.
And I guess while we're looking up the number, if we go back to slide 7, that gives you a better idea of actual dollar amounts. And again,
And the dollar amounts are important too, right?
That's right. And that this is based on 40 million. If we, whatever percentage, if we do 40 million or less, then obviously that dollar amount, the proportionality would remain the same. The dollar amount backs off. So slide 7 kind of gives you what it would actually look like in somebody's paycheck. I can go on to Mr. Moon while we're waiting for people to find.
Actually, we're going to need a little bit more time to provide
Sure.
that data for Mr. Press. So if we can maybe answer it as a budget question.
Sure.
We have the information, we just have to sort it and aggregate it
Sure,
differently.
that's fine. It's complicated. Okay, Mr. Moon?
When superintendent says halfway, it's not really halfway. 40 out of 91, it's closer to 44, 45%. That's even assuming we get that full $40 million to invest in that. At this point in time, I am prepared to support in concept whether when we actually adopt the budget, whether there could be a little bit of a tweaking of percentage here and there. I don't know, but generally I can support this, and I can support our esteemed chair when she makes a presentation to the County Board of Supervisors on Tuesday, on behalf of the school board. If there's much, enough support on basic concept like this, she could present that. I would feel very comfortable her to make that representation to the Board of Supervisors. In a partial response to Ms. Corbett Sanders' request for what if you added that 1% of a market scale adjustment. Am I correct in assuming that all of these data graph on, I think it's the slide number 8, is based upon current data, and other school districts also adjust the compensation bill their teachers through market scale adjustment or step increase, that what's at the top, market survey average, will only go up. Because I don't expect any school district to actually cut teacher salary. So even if we add additional 1% to our graph, all the school districts will do more or less, something similar to that. So probably that gap we will see will not change much.
Correct, or in the event that the other districts do more than a 1% market
More
scale
than we do,
adjustment,
then
the gap
gap will
could
widen.
actually increase.
Okay, thank you.
I have Ms. Hines and Ms. Evans.
Yeah, I want to thank Mr. Moon for bringing that up, because I think some of the questions that I've gotten from supervisors are, we've become immersed in this compensation study and what we're going to do, but they really have no idea what we're talking about. And I think some of them look at the 40 million for compensation and think that, they've said out loud that we don't really have a plan. But, in fact, we do. We've worked on it enough to have a plan, at least for this first year's investment. So what I was hoping, thank you, Mr. Moon, because what I should get tonight, if I can, or over the next few days from the board, is support to include a description of what the direction that the board has given to Dr. Garza, and even this slide, slide 8 might
Slide
be
8.
something that I could just flash up there during my remarks to make clear basically what we're trying to do. So unless anybody has a problem with that, I will put that in my remarks.
Yes, and I don't, Ms. Hines, along that line, you're not approving anything necessarily. Everything can change. Your final decisions will be reflected at the end of May. But I think what they want to see is that we have some methodology should we have the 40 million. That's what they want to see. And I think we've been in our meetings, I think that when we showed some of this method, it made sense. And by the way, we've sent all of our compensation presentations to all the Board of Supervisors. I think we've had 3 or 4 different presentations. We sent all those materials to them. So I think if you don't mind, Ms. Hines, just to kind of clarify, it's not locking you all into anything. It's showing that we have a methodology for differentiating this money, should we have it moving forward. And we just want to know that we've reflected that appropriately as, according to the wishes of the board as well.
And
That
there
we
is,
differentiated appropriately.
and there is an understanding from the Board of Supervisors, we are trying to, the Board of Supervisors always look very carefully at their first responders scales, as well as they're doing a market study right now for all of their employees, which they do, as we do. And as we have, begun to show this detailed plan, it does make sense because they do the same kinds of things for their first responders, their police and fire, and they have done this before, and I believe as part of their market study, they are earlier in their market study than we are, but they will also be looking very hard at their scales because they're also obviously concerned about the quality of their workforce. I have Ms. Evans, Ms. Schultz, and then Ms. McLaughlin.
Yes, I'm glad both Mr. Moon and Ms. Hines brought that up because I would be very comfortable with Ms. Hines using this chart number 8 and actually some more of the details, so it's not just a line. We don't want it to look like we just drew a line. That this is the concept that we're working on, and so I think it's important that we are addressing this sag in the middle, and so I'm very comfortable in supporting that general concept again with the understanding that it can change. Just looking back over what we had discussed sort of as a long-range plan, the B and C, it would be good for us to know, to be able to see how far does this get us to either of those. And I'm looking at B and C, and it doesn't get us nearly as far as any of us would like to getting to B and C.
No, but our point is this.
Right.
That we're changing the line
Yes.
toward that direction.
Right.
We're changing the arc,
we're
so
getting
it
rid
does
of
help
that.
us into the future.
Right.
As we make those decisions, long-term decisions, it does situate us.
Right.
We're not just continuing to do the same thing and, and not moving it in the right direction.
Right. And I think that may be important for us to clarify for the Board of Supervisors as well, that this is something that we're doing to try to deal with this particular problem in the middle that we have, and we all know that we have that, and that we're going to have further discussion about a longer range plan, because the longer range plan is going to be very important. So I think if Ms. Hines is looking for consensus to present this, I would certainly support that. Okay.
Might I interrupt? I think it might be a good idea if we put on that market survey average school year 15, 16, because I think the point that was made earlier, I think is a really good point that we need to continue to emphasize, that's a static. So maybe if we put that somewhere, reflect it somewhere on the chart, that might be helpful.
Just add it at the end of average on the line. One more update. Thank you. Ms. Schultz, Ms. McLaughlin, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Schultz?
So I want to talk about, we keep talking about bringing the salary up, but when you take the slide where we have the differentiated compensation out of total compensation, and that number changes from 141,000 over the career to 52,000, that means that about 64% of the compensation difference is in benefits, and only 36% compensation difference is in salary. And that's where I want to be very careful. I see some nods over there. I don't know if people are following me, where we keep talking just about salary and closing the gap on salary, but basically about 65% of the gap is a benefits gap, not a salary gap. Are you understanding what I'm saying? So I'm concerned that we're talking about putting all the money towards salary when the real reason that there's a total gap is the difference between salary and compensation. And that closes. No, it is the case, is we keep talking about the 141,000 as the marker for, the stunning statistic between us and Arlington is the slide that we've used. But when you layer in compensation, that gap goes down to 52,000. So you don't have, it's not just a salary gap. It's when you have salary plus compensation, all of a sudden that becomes much smaller. So if we put money just to salary, then the question becomes, what are we going to do on the benefit side? Is there going to be are we going to level out on a teeter-totter, if you will, by applying a lot more to salary? Then you're going to further upend the issue of the total compensation gap when it's compensation, benefits plus salary.
I believe we're getting a report on ERFC and is already beginning on benefits. And it's my understanding that we're looking at here is fixing this unusual slope and as a down payment in that. So we're not done, and obviously there will be opportunities coming very quickly to talk about some of the other pieces.
Okay. So it's, I don't know, I feel, maybe I'm not, it's late and, we've been meeting for 8 hours or something like that, so.
Let me just say on salaries, we're developing a salary scale, right? Salary scales are designed in absence of whatever benefits we layer on top of that, because that's what people compare when they come to our system. What do we pay a 15-year teacher? What do they pay a 15-year teacher? What do they pay?
I know, Dr. Gauser, but that's actually the problem that I have, because we're not having an intellectually honest conversation if we say people are looking at what they can get paid here versus someplace else. It's not a holistic approach because you're not taking into account the total compensation, which is we're benefits rich. And so it's not apples to apples to just say, I mean, I generally, you know what, let me just say,
Okay.
Fundamentally, I agree that you gotta fix what I call the swale. It's like the reverse camelback or whatever. But I don't want that to be done disproportionately when we don't take into effect that the salary gap we claim at 141,000 over 30 years is the difference, turns into only a $52,000 gap when you layer in compensation. So there is a compensatory makeup that happens when you layer in the benefits side. And that's the part that, we can't just layer this dollar for dollar on the salary side and not acknowledge that gap closes tremendously when we layer in the benefits.
And I believe you're talking about the lifetime benefits.
Yes,
of course,
that was
you will
lifetime
have an
earnings.
opportunity.
Well, and maybe, honestly, Ms. Strauss, you backed into, something that really has to be talked about there, which is, what? Are teachers making lifetime decisions? Are they making 30-year career decisions anymore? And that's a question of, those are the courageous conversations around, do we need to have a discussion about professionalizing teacher salaries and stepping back from defined benefits? That is a hard conversation to have, but teachers need the salaries. That's what we're hearing. Salary report after salary report says that they'd rather have the money up front in salary and be self-determinative in their own retirement.
And you will have an opportunity to discuss that coming forward. Ms. McLaughlin, I think, is next.
Actually, I had.
I'm sorry, you had another question? Sure.
I had one other question.
Sure.
Are you planning as a part of this process in fixing, whether it's year 6 to 14 or year 5 to 21, wherever we're talking about, including an education, I'm sorry, I'm looking around, Miss Polchek's lovely curls, an education piece, because I feel like in talking to teachers, there isn't necessarily an understanding that they have a great desire that their colleagues who are in, say, a more difficult position, in a difficult to fill position, working with, maybe, specific categories of children that it makes the job very difficult. They advocate basically battle pay for their peers. So they're willing, they're self-professing, listen, these categories of employees should be making, whether it's a stipend or battle pay or whatever you call it. But when we talked about operationalizing it and saying, okay, well, if that happens, if we maybe give some battle pay to some difficult positions and we try to fix the swale in the salary gap in certain years, that means that you and you will be getting a salary increase that's either bigger or maybe the person sitting next to you won't get one at all. And they revolted mentally at that point and left that on the table and said, oh, no, I don't want a raise if the person next to me doesn't get a raise. That's not fair. I want everybody to get a raise. So then they said, just move the whole line up. And I'm like, if you move the whole line up, don't you fundamentally understand it doesn't change the shape of the line? And so to me, there has to be almost like an economics explanation that goes along with whatever decision we make, and you have to plan to do that now, that if certain people are moved up more, that there is a employee buy-in. You have to understand that means the person sitting next to you either might not get one at all, or they might get a very, very small one in comparison, because they're already mentally having a very difficult time grasping, like, I think there's a guilt complex or something that this may come. So I'm asking that staff plan for that, and you may have to develop some vernacular around educating people about how this gets fixed, and that there won't be effectively parity in some raises at some point.
Right, and I believe that there are discussions. You can go ahead, Dr.
And we are planning to do that, and also to bring that conversation back to have with the board as we look at some either differentiated pay or stipends for critical needs fields, hard to fill positions, the positions you're mentioning. And there are different models that we could look at doing that, and so the model that we would settle on would help shape those conversations. You're talking about one that would affect the pay scale, but we could look at one where the pay scale and additional dollars for critical positions would be a different type of compensation, a stipend or something like that. But yes, you're right.
Those employees were basically saying, no, I don't want a bigger raise or raise under those conditions if that means somebody else won't get one. And that to me means there needs to be an education, coaching speech that goes along with this that helps explain what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I believe that there has been a lot of communication with the teacher representative organizations specifically on this. And I also know from the viewpoint of listening to the Board of Supervisors of the last couple of years, they have been very interested in us targeting.
I know we've been talking about it, Ms. Strauss, but what I'm saying is on the ground,
yes,
when you sit in a room full of teachers who range from year 1 to year 2 to year 6 to 13 to 28, yes, they don't understand it, and practically, when you talk about what that means to the people in that room, they feel bad, quote unquote, that somebody else won't get what they'll get. And then, then the conversation tries to change. And that's, it's incumbent upon us as policymakers to start explaining what a model like this will look like when it's operationalized.
Yes, I believe so. Okay, Ms. McLaughlin, Mr. Wilson?
I'm going to try to go about this a different way, because one of the things I want for our school system is for us to be as compelling as possible, not just to the public, but we've got to help the supervisors understand what we're trying to accomplish here, because they're our funding authority that we're trying to get their partnership to fix this very real problem. So what keeps coming back at me in the conversations with them is we know from the compensation study that we have a compensation gap. It's a total compensation gap. The gap is worse when you only look at salary alone. And that was the 141,000 that Ms. Schultz said over 30 years. When you add in the benefits that FCPS provides its employees compared to the market average, that gap narrows in total compensation of what a teacher earns over 30 years to 52,000. So when any of us have wanted to add a position in anything here in FCPS, teacher or otherwise, what we always know is there's the salary cost to hire that new person, but then you have to add in the benefits cost, and that's the total cost to have that person in your system. There's a finite amount of money that we have to operate this school system, and if we are saying, looking at the blue line, the market survey average, but this is a salary-only graph, and we go after saying, we gotta fix this and put money. And I totally understand being strategic in these steps that you're talking about, or the scales and where to put it. But right now, we're trying to, as I understand it, at minimum, try to reach the blue line. But that's salary to salary. Now you add in that with those very same employees, we brought their salary up to the blue line, but with the benefits, I'm not saying your plan, that's the goal. Your proposal in front of us says, if we put some money in this place and in this place, we might close the gap by 25%. We might close it by 50%, depending on where we are, right?
And just in response to this line of questioning, I just have to say, when the county talks about their salaries, you know, whether it's police and safety or total compensation for all their employees, they don't say, let's look at that with total benefits. They're looking at salary. So I find it ironic that when we're talking about the needs of our employees, they want us to look at total compensation. But when they're looking at the needs of their employees, they're talking about salaries.
Well,
and so, and I would also further emphasize, I think it's important for us to go back and look at, even when we look at total benefits, we're still below the market average. Even when we look at total benefits, total compensation.
Everyone completely agrees that whether it was total compensation, whether it was salary, we are currently below. The first thing I want to raise is, and it's funny that you said this, Dr. Garza, because I wrote on my notes, apples to apples. We need an apples to apples conversation with the supervisors, because it's not two different rules for two different games. So if you can educate this board and demonstrate to us that they're asking you to play it by a different set of rules, which we saw on February 16th, where we got lectured, you didn't stay to the 3% guidance we gave you, but a different set of rules went to the county executive where he was allowed to create a 5% increase in his side of the spending, and no one lectured him. So I'm all about parity, parity, parity. So if you're telling me that this is a different game that they want us playing to, then honestly, if you want to win a debate or you want to win a position, which I'm always up for winning, we got to be very strategic in what our language is. So we should have started right off the bat and said, we're going after our compensation study the way you do it for your employees. You go salary to salary, that's what we're doing. If you want total compensation, then before we even embark on that, you run your numbers again with where it goes when you add in total benefits. Are you now above? Because I'm in agreement with you. If they're going salary to salary, but this is the first we're hearing about it tonight, that they do it differently and want us to, like they do it salary to salary, but they want us to do total compensation. I want to make sure we have no Achilles heel. I want to be as strong as we can, but I've not been able to explain to the public or anyone else who's asking, how come you guys are ignoring the fact that we are, as a system, more generous in our benefits? And so when we go to target a plan, we have to be able to answer these questions first, or otherwise we'll lose before we even get to present.
And to further add to your point, because I agree with you, Ms. McLaughlin, I would be happy to compare our benefits to the county benefits. Okay, we can tell you that theirs is richer than ours, and I don't consider ours rich. I don't consider us benefits rich. I know some people might. I don't consider us benefits rich. Also, as I've pointed out in previous presentations, our employees have to pay a lot more out of pocket than county employees do, a significant amount more. So that's also something I think down the road might be interesting to look at, right? Not only to the benefit plans, but how much are employees having to put into those plans? Very different out-of-pocket cost. So I think that's something else we have to continue to bring up moving forward.
So the way I look at this whole scenario for us to think about as a board is you want to go into any sort of negotiation, and honestly, it kind of is. We're trying to negotiate with our funding authority why they need to give us this money. Most lawyers will tell you you have to anticipate what your opponent is going to say so that you can already, have the answer in hand and in fact, take away their argument. So I do think Dr. Garza, from what you've shared with us, can be extremely compelling for being able to say, number one, you guys do salary compensation. Number two, our employees' benefits are actually not as generous as yours. Number three, ours actually contribute more than yours do. So now that that's all understood, let's go back to the apples conversation. You guys are at market average with your public safety and fire. We believe our teachers deserve that very same dedication to funding the important work they do. That at least, in other words, kind of enables us to diffuse or deflect some of these rabbit holes they suck us down in, and then we never even get to they're distractors. And I know you want to get past them, but I want us to really start thinking strategically, because right now they've been really good about pulling us off down. I mean, that February 16th meeting was rabbit holes all over the place, and we just kept getting sucked down to every single one of them. We never got to the big thing, which is you got 5%, we've got 3%. How's that reflecting our county values on education?
Okay, Mr. Wilson, then Ms. Hoff.
Megan, I hope you go to the meeting and convince them. I'm convinced. And I'm a lawyer. So my questions, I did have some comments on regarding total compensation. I think that those points have been made adequately. My questions really are, I think, a little more straightforward. So looking at employee positions that we're losing staff, where is our biggest weakness in terms of when we lose staff? What is the trigger points or trigger point that we most commonly lose? And one thing that I've heard is it's oftentimes around the 5-year mark that that teachers go somewhere else. And I guess the point I have to make is that, as time goes on, those benefits in retirement begin to mean more and more to people and families. And when a teacher is starting out and they're in their first 5 to 10 years, it's really focused on cash because they're starting their families, they're trying to buy a house. And I guess one thing I would be interested in reconsidering as a board is whether or not we totally close that gap in the first early years, so that we make sure that to the extent there's a young family out there that $1,000 makes or $2,000 a year makes a difference, we don't lose them because it's just as easier for them to go to a Loudoun County school as to a Fairfax County school. So I would say that in terms of using the page 8 chart, I guess I would be a little more reluctant to put what is clearly sort of an evolving notions of the board towards how we would apply the funds. And just because I think that if we say, well, this is how we would use it, we open up a little bit, even though we wouldn't put it in those terms, to having to have an argument in an area that we don't want to have that argument. We want to have that argument on equity and what is fair between employees of Fairfax County Public Schools and county employees across the board. How we end up, every dollar we get from the county, I have no doubt we will think through it and use it in the best way possible in terms of salary. I think that when we express that, hey, we really need to close the gap where it's greatest, I think we probably should continue to think about that, because really we should think about salary in terms of where is it most important? To which employees is it most important? And to which employees is keeping their existing benefit package the greatest? And so I guess my feeling about this chart is I would be a little more tentative about putting it in front of the Board of Supervisors. Well, I do have one specific question, kind of similar to like where do we lose employees? So how often do we have retirees coming back and teaching for Fairfax County Schools? Do we keep that number? Do we know?
There are some prohibitions and some controls over that are codified in state law, so I don't know. I think it's only in critical shortage areas. Is that allowed? Is that correct?
It is a practice that we do have retired employees come back and work for us in different capacities. Dr. Garza's right. There is a stipulation of the law about how long they have to be separated from the division before they can come back. But it is something that we see pretty regularly of individuals coming back and working in the system.
So,
Just to provide clarity, though, when they're coming back into the system as substitutes,
Sure.
they're not coming back making their per diem.
Yeah.
They're coming back making our substitute rates that we pay for our retired teachers. So when even other employees that come back to the system, they're not coming back to the system being employed making what they were making when they retired from the system. Just
It's
to
my understanding
provide that clarity.
if somebody does want to come back as a regular employee, they have to give up their retirement.
They do.
So you can't, they have to give up their retirement, they can't double dip.
Right.
You can't retire, collect your retirement, and then come back as a regular employee. Under the Virginia rules and the IRS rules, you can't do that. And we have had people who have fully retired and then have, because we needed them, they've come back. But then part of that agreement, they have to give up their retirement payment.
So if they were to come back as a part-time substitute at a school, they would lose their retirement?
For substitute,
No, we've got some rules in place to help our retirees that want to come back and work with us in terms of the number of hours that they're allowed to work for us in the system so that they don't run afoul of those rules with their retirement. And it's based on our need as well. And so we try to work with them in those situations so that they maintain their benefits. They also provide and help meet the needs that we need from a staffing perspective in certain situations. But we do try to be conscious of that for the employee because it can have effects on the organization as well if they exceed those.
Yeah, could I get those numbers, like just so I can see sort of what are we talking about?
Sure.
And at what year are they most likely to leave? And then at what year do they typically retire? And what percentage of those folks who do retire from the system end up coming back either in another capacity or as a substitute teacher?
Okay, we can work, sure. We can work on that.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Ms. Huff, Ms. Hines, and Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Thank you. I think I'm going to try and continue where Ms. McLaughlin and I think a little where Mr. Wilson was getting to. I feel like we've headed into two different conversations tonight. So I believe we started tonight with the salary conversation. How do we make sure we retain and hire the best teachers? We know they care about salary. We know we're really behind. We know our slope doesn't look correct. And then we started to talk about adding this to the presentation for the Board of Supervisors, which leads to we're justifying this $40 million, how we're spending it, why it's a good idea, how we're going to change our slope. And I think what Ms. McLaughlin was getting at is the Board of Supervisors has been right or wrong, has been talking about the conversation we're having in terms of total compensation. So just as a number point, if we could pull up our total compensation presentation from February, slide 13. So if we look at year 5, the teachers that are in year 5, under total compensation are pretty much, it looks like 5 to 6 are at market value. So when we're talking about, on the other slide, getting them, reducing the salary gap for 25%, at some point we're pushing that red line above our line above market value, which, again, I think it's two different conversations. For the purpose of, do we want to change our salary slope? I think we've all agreed that yes, we do. We want to get more competitive on salary. But when we're talking about justifying how many dollars we need to get there, we've already said we're going to talk about it in April. We're going to look at ERFC. Maybe over the course of time, we're going to adjust the balance of salary versus benefits. But for the purposes of presenting it to the Board of Supervisors, this is the sort of presentation we need to consider in a whole to say, do we want to look at it from just one perspective, or are we going to be asked from a total perspective and be ready to answer that? Are we okay with the fact that while some people are going to get nothing from the 40 million, we're going to be bumping another set above market value when we give them the extra 25%. So anyway, I don't know if that helps clarify. I don't know what we want to do with that, but I think that's the conversation we're having.
Okay, Ms. Hines, Ms. Corbett-Sanders.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but I'm not sure how to answer it, honestly, because I think in a way, I just wanted to respond to a couple of things. I do think, to Mr. Wilson's question, I think we need to try to describe this, what we plan to do with the $30 million. I think we have to try to describe that, because the one thing that we're hearing from our funders is that they don't want to write us a $40 million check and not know where it's going, and if they have to raise taxes to do that, I get it, that makes sense. So I think we have to show that we do have a first-year plan for that money, or for whatever part of that money we can get. And I think with the question of, Mr. Wilson also asked the question about equity, and I don't know if this is kind of what you're getting to also, Ms. Huff, but if you look at the chart on slide 8, one of the things that we have definitely heard from the Board of Supervisors and the county executive is that their goal for their employees' salaries now, not compensation, is the market average. That's their goal. So we can show in this slide that we don't have equity with the county's employees right now when it comes to that, because they're getting close to that goal all the time, right? They're on either side of market average all the time, and we are way below. So I think that this actually makes the equity argument in the best way, because it shows what we're planning to do about closing that equity gap. To me, it's more compelling than saying, well, you're giving your employees 2% and we're giving our employees 1.8. To me, that's sort of apples to oranges. This is apples to apples, because we know that they want their employees at the market average. And they do talk about it in terms of salary. So I do kind of feel like the salary and the benefits have to, just by their nature, be different conversations. And I don't know, when we look at total lifetime compensation, I just feel like that's not the same as what we're looking at here.
So I want to provide a little bit of clarity on that. The other chart where we went to the February's presentation where it showed the lifetime, because we're trying to progress a teacher through what we think would be their lifetime earnings, the front end of that scale is a bachelor's lane. Toward the back end of the scale, starting from step 5, is the master's lane. So when you go toward the tail end of that scale, you do see that we're above the market average. But if you look at this chart, slide 9, on tonight's presentation, those salaries are not changing under this approach. So we're not increasing those salaries by closing the gap by 25%. So you kind of have to look at the master's lane on this chart and see that there are green shaded boxes in those steps, meaning there's no change to the salaries at those steps.
Right, so it's target, and that is the question that the Board of Supervisors have been asking us, is if you are going to attempt to change some of your salary scales, how are you going to target it to specifically address the issues that we are beginning to see, our inability to keep our people, and they tend to be on the master's lane, and they are in those mid-career issues. That has really been their question. What are we going to do? And the consensus of the board is that the additional money would not be spread against all employees. It would be strategically used to basically begin to change this curve. It doesn't solve it, just to begin to change the curve. I have Ms. Corbett Sanders.
Thank you, Ms. Hines, for the way you teed this up, because I think it's really important, and it goes back to a bit what I mentioned earlier of speaking to the Board of Supervisors in their language and setting the target as we want to be market scale is really important to say. The second thing is that this is really a triage moment. This is not a solving the problem long term. But what it does do is start moving us towards that objective. It does something else as well, though. And the reason I was asking about your percentages earlier, it was not because I agree or disagree with your percentages. It's different than that. We know that the county executive has proposed a 5% increase for all of the first responders. And in addition to that, has put forth a recommendation for 4% for longevity payments for those people that are in the upper scales. So when you look at our numbers here, we're actually quite competitive with what they have proposed themselves. It makes it much easier to have that equity discussion when we frame the discussion using their language. And so I would just urge that as we go forth for next week's meeting, is we actually do, maybe it's 2 columns. This is what your objective is. This is what our objective is. Hey, we share the same objective. This is what you're doing with your first responders. Hey, this is what we're doing with our first responders. Guess what? We're similar. Isn't this great? Everybody says we're talking against each other. We're all using the same metrics, the same language. And when we start doing that, then we can actually have a discussion that says, and future work may be a comparison of the benefits between what is available to FCPS employees versus Fairfax County employees. And so, you know, it just moves the discussion into a different way of having an important conversation that I think we have to have.
Okay. Are there any other questions? None. We're talked out. Okay. Yes, tomorrow, 9:30, lines of business. And Ms. Hines and I guess Dr. Garza, what will the content be again?
Okay, I didn't bring the list with me. There are 3 topics that were agreed upon some time ago where we have some joint work that's going on, and so it was actually recommended by Ed Long. Behavioral health, and I think it's school health, and then transportation. And the transportation piece is specific to our pilot that we began with the county this past year. We're providing county bus passes to our high school students, and so they're going to be speaking to that. We are told by the county officials that we will be done with our joint pieces before noon, so you can plan for your day. So we'll be anywhere from 9:30 to right about noon.
Great, thank you.
I'm not certain of the actual exact order of those. Are you all? It could change, so I'm not sure the exact order. But those 3 starting at 9:30.
Thank you. In room 9 and 10 in the
And
government
we
center.
have been invited to stay for the whole day, should we wish to.
I don't know what's in the afternoon. Okay. All right. Was there any more information? I know you guys were trying to get.
No, I was just going to say, in the afternoon, the county will be doing their 3rd quarter budget review, right, as well as a discussion of their CIP, and then they're hearing from, I believe, the Human Services Council
regarding the budget. So that's our afternoon schedule.
Okay, great, all right. Thank you very much. Seeing no further hands raised, this work session is adjourned. Thank you very much. Thank you, staff. Thank you very much.